It's time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with our very own Florence Villeminot. Hi, Flo.
Hi, Jeannie.
This week, you are focusing on something that is very, very French, le vin, wine.
That's right. It's definitely a popular topic. I've got a lot of people who've written to me on Twitter wanting to know more about it. This is going to have to be the first of a series because there were lots of questions. Now, France, of course, is famous for the quality and the diversity of its wines. It's one of the largest wine producers in the world, just behind its arch rival Italy. Now, last year, France produced over 47 million hectoliters. That's nearly 7 billion bottles of wine. Now, lots of countries in the world make wine, but here in France, wine making is an art form, and it has been for over 2,000 years.
It's true. The very first traces of French wine date back to the 6th century BC. Now, these days, of course, wine is produced all across France, so much that it's hard to actually even generalize to what French wine really is.
That's right. French wines have more of a regional than a national identity. And let's take a look at a map of France. Check it out. You know, you talk about Bordeaux, Bourgogne, Beaujolais, Champagne. You can see they're just on this very long list of kinds of wines. And all these regions make different kinds of wines as well. You have red, you have white, you have rosé, you have sparkly wines. There's definitely something for everyone. And as you can imagine, every region thinks it makes the best kind of wine.
Now, there is a special system here in France to control the quality of French wine and to protect these treasured brands like a Champagne or a Bordeaux.
That's right. That's called the Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, AOC. It's our word du jour. It's kind of a controlled trademark system that exists for other products like cheese, but we'll have to get to that in another episode of French Connections. Now, for wine, there are hundreds of geographically defined appellation d'origine contrôlée. Now, what's interesting is they can control entire regions, individual villages, or even specific vineyards. Now, to be granted one of these AOC and to be able to put it on your label, you have to follow very strict rules about grape varieties and winemaking practices.
It's true. This AOC thing is so fascinating. For example, Champagne, contrary to popular belief, is not just any sparkling wine. It has to come from a very specific place and made in a very particular way.
That's right. And one of our viewers, the British art critic Valdemar Januszek, wanted to know more about champagnes and sparkling wines in general. Check out his tweet to me. He said, "Florence, apart from champagne, what are the best French sparkling wines?" Now, that is a really tough one to answer, Valdemar, and I must admit, and it might be a little shocking, I'm actually not a huge fan of champagne. I do like sparkling wines, however, and the one I prefer is one called Crémant. Now, you can find really good ones in Alsace, but my favorite ones come from the Loire region.
All right, Flo, the French wine industry has changed so much, particularly in recent years. Internationally, it's been challenged by more and more world wines, but also here at home, it's facing a decline in consumption.
That's right. Now, just like eating habits, French people are changing their drinking habits, which might be a healthy thing. In the past 60 years, French people have cut their daily consumption of wine in half. Let's take a listen.
I drink rosé in the summer, but that's it.
I mainly drink on the weekend, 2 to 3 glasses during the week.
Now, French people might be drinking less wine. They're still drinking a lot of wine. Let's take a look at how much wine French people drank in 2014. You can see here 44 liters. That's per person per year, about 59 bottles. And only one place in the world drinks more. It might be a little surprising, but it's the Vatican. You can see they drank 74 liters. That's about 100 bottles. I guess it has to do with all those church services they have there. But here in France, wine certainly is an integral part of our culture. The legal drinking age for wine is 16 years old, but people tend to drink their first glass way before that. Usually in their family, it's kind of a rite of passage, something that means that you're becoming an adult. And they say that wine is good for your health. Maybe that's why French people live a long time. I know my own grandmother lived to be over 90 years old, and she said that she only drank wine at the meal because anything else makes your insides rust.
Now, the diversity of French wine, it really can be intimidating for people, not only outside of France, but within France as well.
That's right. And one of our viewers had a question about this, too. This is Joseph Ganesh. He wanted to know, gifting a wine bottle while visiting a French couple's home, which is a safe bet for someone who has zero knowledge on wine. Now, I must admit, it's quite daunting. The best thing to do, of course, is to go to a wine shop. It's known as a cave here, and ask an expert for advice. But you can also go to your local supermarket, and you might find a gem that isn't actually that expensive, because that's what's great about wine in France. It's everywhere, and it's not that expensive. Few tips. Don't worry about screw tops. They're actually not that bad, and also never go below €5.
We are in the middle of fall right now. This is the middle of the grape harvest, and we always make a big deal about each year's vintage. How is this year's vintage going to be?
Well, the wine experts I spoke to said that this year is going to be a little bit of a mixed bag because the weather was really weird this year. There was some freezing early in the season. Now we've been experiencing droughts. So there are going to be some really good wines, but also some not so good wines. And a lot of that has to do with climate change. Climate change is changing the quality of French wines. Let's take a listen.
The grapes are ripening during seasons that are warmer than they were 20 or 30 years ago. The sugar levels in grapes is increasing, and therefore the alcohol level in wine has a tendency to go up.
More alcohol isn't necessarily a good thing because it can seriously alter the flavor of wines. Now, what's interesting is a growing number of winemakers in France are starting to go organic, essentially trying to cut out any kind of chemicals from the winemaking process. And this is really the new trend in winemaking these days. I must admit, it makes some pretty good wines and doesn't give you as big as a headache. So do try it out, but do drink responsibly.
Exactly. Thank you so much for that, Florence Villeminot, and that focus on wine. And thanks as well for all of your questions and your tweets to Flo. If you want to send in your own question about any subject that has to do with France or the French, be sure to tweet Flo at Flo Villeminot.